Good morning, comrades. You're listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3. This is your weekly Good Morning Comrade. Jeff here today with a very special interview. We have, actually, you were a guest on the show a couple of years ago, if I recall correctly. But David Griscom is the host of The Jacobin Show. He is also the host of Left Reckoning. He is also the long time, I mean, this is where I found you, is when you were with the Michael Brooks Show. You were a producer over there. The David Griscom Economic Minute, really one of the one of the highlights of that. Man, that was such a fun show, and Michael was such a electric guy. The world is so much
100%.
less without him. But he's also the author of a fabulous new book, The Myth of Red Texas, which just recently came out. David Griscom, welcome back to Good Morning Comrade. How you doing tonight, brother?
I'm so happy to be here. Really thrilled to be back on the program. I love the city of New Orleans, so it's always really good to be able to chat about it. And thank you so much for bringing me on and talking about the book.
Totally, bro. Anytime. Yeah, and let's just jump right into it. The Myth of Red Texas. I was reading through the book earlier today, and when I read the name of the introductory chapter, which is "Can We Take Hold of Our History?" I knew exactly. I'm like, he's going to talk about Harvey K, isn't he? He's going to mention Harvey K's name. I just called it because, and for those folks who don't know, Harvey K is a retired now. He's a professor emeritus of Democratic Studies at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay, multiple time guest on this show, and he was also the author of this fabulous book, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, which is basically his effort to tap into the existing radical history that exists in this country. And what I see in this project that you put forward is something very similar. I guess you want to talk about it?
Yeah, 100%. I'd also note, Harvey K is also a proud LSU grad as well.
He's an LSU Tiger. We have discussed this.
No, I mean 100%. So Harvey K is somebody who's been a total mentor for me, and I think like many people on the left, I was always interested in history, but I didn't always, I think, have like the full sense of the kind of richness of the radical political tradition that exists in the United States, and certainly I think I don't think I had the strongest connection about my home state of Texas. Connection to that history. So the myth of Red Texas, I mean, it gets into a lot, but basically the kind of quick version of it is that I challenge this idea that Texas is automatically a conservative state. I argue, in fact, that the way that Texas is kind of seen by the kind of national media and also by Texans themselves is a project of the right that has been, yes, fairly successful, but it's not an accurate look at our own history. And then the other part of the book, the majority of the book, was actually retelling that history. So I go all the way back to the fence cutters and the cowboys and this kind of fight over the open range and reclaim a movements that were trying to fight for public property, the open range, the idea that land belonged to the people. I talk about the Populist Party, which was not only an interesting third party movement, it ends up overtaking the the Republican Party as the second major party in Texas. And then eventually, in fact, overtakes the Republican Party in the 1896 election, which I argue was fraudulent. There are also plenty of historians and scholars who agree with me on that. And then I get into the Socialist Party as well, the Brotherhood of Timber Workers in Louisiana, Emma Tenayuka, and many, many other stories that kind of challenge this narrative. And it's really an argument, to borrow again from Harvey K, to take hold of our history, because I think if we want to see a change in politics in Texas, being armed and understanding our kind of radical tradition is critical. But if I could just make one last quick plug here, is that while a lot of this stuff is about Texas, though Texas and Louisiana, they're so connected. Most of these movements are kind of cross-border movements, and I write about Louisiana a fair bit in the book as well. But even for somebody who's not interested in Louisiana history, somebody who's not interested in Texas history, the questions that we have today in the labor movement on kind of left political movements, they're very, very pertinent to the questions that are being brought up in this book. How do you build a movement that brings in everyday working class people into politics? How do you sustain yourself against a right-wing movement that might try to smash it, destroy it through violence and through other forms of coercion? These are all questions that were very much alive here. So there's part history, part rebuttal of the right, and part a kind of guide for labor people and radicals today to try to figure out how we can build a better future.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned the sort of like shared sort of radical history that exists not just in Texas and Louisiana, but just throughout the South, throughout the Midwest, throughout this entire country. That really does get papered over with this sort of like modern uh, kayfabe, like to use a wrestling term that I've talked about with Jason Miles quite a bit. This sort of like story that that not we, but that the ruling class and the media class and all these folks keep up to sort of make it seem as though any kind of alternative is impossible to what we currently have, or any trajectory getting away from the current sort of neoliberal establishment order, which is which is breaking down before our very eyes right now. I mean,
Hmm.
happen is like their solution is the only thing. This is the only thing that's possible. There's more of the same, and we're just not doing it hard enough. And one of the things that I've also noticed across all of these sort of case studies that you point out is that organization building solidarity is key in each and every one of them, and the points by which they break down is always the sort of limits to that solidarity. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, 100%. And I would just also note that like the book's genesis, OR and the Nation kind of came out to me and asked me to write a book. And the initial pitch was for me to write a book about the entire South, which I would be very happy to do. But in doing the research and preparing for the book, it's like, all right, there's enough here in Texas to be its own book. And you could probably
it would be much thicker book, wouldn't it?
yeah. And you could probably do one of these for every state in the South. But yeah, no, I mean, the question of organization, I think, is really such an important part of this history. I mean, let's maybe look at some of the examples here. So, the Farmers Alliance, which is the precursor for the Populist Party, and if anyone's interested in third party politics, I mean, the Populist Party, the People's Party, this is probably the most successful model that we've really seen in our history. And how did they come about? Well, they didn't get a website, obviously. They didn't just come up with a bunch of talking points. It came out of actual organizations of farmers. So I won't get too much in the weeds here, about like the intricacies of farming in Texas and Louisiana in the late 1800s. But effectively, you had a system that was taking advantage of everyday people. You had most folks who were working class, small landholders are oftentimes more and more renters. So people who lived on the land, work the land, but they don't own the land. They have to provide, their harvest to the merchant class. This merchant class also has a big ledger, and that ledger has all the debts that accrued over the year. Most of these places were small rural places. This was the only place in town to buy things, not just seed and equipment, but if your wife wants a dress, if you want to get some fat back, if you want anything, to get by through the year, you go to this ledger. Most people don't have cash. And the prices in the South are completely out of whack at this period of time as well. There's a massive crisis in prices. So things are very expensive. So what do most people do? Well, they get it on credit. A modern example of this, let's think about it. We already are seeing all these kind of financial companies trying to finance people buying pizza, right? Like you see how much our life is kind of indebted and financialized. There's a lot of similarities there. The farmers start asking themselves, why are these people being able to take advantage of us? And they see, okay, it's the merchant class. How does the merchant class take advantage of this? Well, they have special access to markets. We are all selling our goods as individuals. What if we pooled our goods and started selling them as a community, as a group, as a class? We would be able to at least negotiate better prices. So this group called the Farmers Alliance kind of rises up on this question. And they start asking themselves this question that I'll paraphrase here from one of the great leaders, S.O. Dawes, who says, the people have begun to ask themselves the question, why is it that those who work most get least and those who work least get most? People start asking themselves that question and they start coming up with these economic and social solutions. But eventually, when they start building cooperatives, when they start building these alternatives, the merchant class, not just in Texas, not just in Louisiana, but in the North, the people who provide the goods to the merchant class start saying, hey, we're not going to sell to these cooperatives, right? So they try to undercut. It's a kind of perverted version of a boycott, but from the capitalist class, from the bosses. Well, the farmers realize, well, a lot of this, and this is just one example of many of the kind of economic solutions that they had. It's one of the many examples of them realizing, okay, we have to take our movement into politics. Throughout this, there's these kind of moves to maybe build up a third party to challenge the Democratic Party, which is the single party in the state of Texas at this time. And they end up gaveling in the People's Party under the leadership of William Lamb, who's an incredible figure. But yes, as you were saying, like, I think this is a really important aspect of this book when it comes to politics. Is like, this is a moment that comes out of like real organizing on like real practical questions. And before I turn off any of the listeners here too, I will remind you that this is Texas. There are plenty of gunfights, cinematic stories in the thing as well. It's not just a long treatise about cotton production. I promise you that.
It's all, there's always gunfights in Texas. This is how it goes. And again, you mentioned the gunfights, and again, I really want to drive the point home as well. You mentioned even sort of the contrast of the sort of like reality of Texas and the sort of the image that Texas sort of has in popular imagination, the John Wayne sort of like true grit image. You also mentioned early on in the book that that's not even necessarily a reflection of the popular will of like open carry or constitutional carry or whatever the hell they call it. It's not really something that's popular among the majority of Texans. And this is sort of like an image that is sort of put on Texas, or that is assumed, or it's just sort of like characterized in that way.
Yeah, so in Texas, for people who don't know, we have it's probably as loose of gun laws as you can have, and one of the most.
I think Louisiana and Texas are always racing on that one to the absolute bottom of the barrel.
In recent years, there has been a push for this thing called constitutional carry, which is the law here in Texas, and they use terms like constitutional carry because. They use terms like constitutional carry because they want to make it seem like this is old fashioned, returning to our roots. When in fact, some of the first laws that were passed in Texas's cities were restrictions, not just on guns, by the way, but like on how long of a knife you could have in public. So the actual tradition when it comes to guns and firearms in Texas, certainly, these are has been a part of Texas life and Texas culture and existence in the state for a long time. But this idea that like you should be able to walk into a bar or any kind of place with a rifle strapped around your back is totally out of connection with the history of Texas. And I think most importantly, too, as I note in the book, it's also just out of connection with the opinions of Texans. Now, when people think of Texas, they think of Republican Party politics, and that's true in the sense that like the Republican Party has dominated election after election. But when you think of those Republican policies that are so associated with Texas, the gun laws, even the abortion restrictions and things like that, you look at public polling on these kind of things, and the law of the land in Texas is completely out of step with like the will of Texans today. And I think that this shows that there's a kind of a crisis in our politics where more and more the will of Texans is just not being represented. And I don't just even mean in the way that maybe I would like to see it. You can just look at the majority opinions of Texans and see how it's not being represented in politics today.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that is, you can take examples like guns, something like that. I think for probably about a decade now, nationwide, just to sort of extrapolate a bit, Medicare for all or universal health care or something along that line, some kind of socialized health care, it's been polling at something around 60% for about a decade. And we don't even, it's like when you have somebody like Dr. Abdul Sayed running in Michigan for Congress, for Senate, it's like, wow, this guy's running on Medicare for all. That's crazy. Oh, let's just talk about how he's associated with Hassan Piker or whatever. Like, it's this really, really weird and pernicious way to sort of like divert from these popular positions by just engaging with the culture war. And that's something that sounds like what's happening, also what you were describing with the image of Texas and some of these other issues.
Well, no, I mean, totally. And like, how effective, the culture war is not a new thing in Texas or in this country. I mean, one of the examples that I think about is the Socialist Party in Texas, which was one of like the larger socialist parties in the nation. Not just in the South. Like the Socialist Party, depending on how you calculate it, was probably the third to second largest in the country. And one of their great leaders was this fellow named G.G. Hamilton. And he was this one time he became a radical preacher. He was a conservative preacher who was arguing against socialism. And he went to all these debates across the state of Texas and across Oklahoma and argued against socialism because he argued that it promoted, quote, free love. which was something that they were very against back then. And you could see how this person is engaging. So, like, here's a socialist making material arguments about the power of the banks, the power of the bosses, the power of the merchant class, all these groups, and this guy wants to talk about free love. Right, he wants to talk about it,
Yeah.
which is that the equivalent then of the culture war, and you could just see how effective and pernicious that kind of way of doing politics has been in the South, and I think nationally. You also note that like the big cotton bosses, the former plantation owners, oftentimes would pay certain kinds of conservative preachers to come and preach very particular views of the world. Hey, if all these people are thinking that their sorry condition is because they're sinners and have affronted God, versus I'm taking advantage of them as their boss, that's good for me. So you see how culture war politics have been used to divide folks. And just to give him his credit, G.G. Hamilton very famously switches sides. He switches sides on stage, and he delivers this incredible speech about his conversion to socialism. It was a very dramatic moment. Obviously, the socialist press had a field day with reprinting it, but his speech is a very powerful one. I highly suggest people read it, because in it he has this incredible line. He says, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but he says, "Will socialists make mistakes? Well, of course, they're only human. But I would rather stand with the masses than with the masters." And seeing somebody like that who was so adamantly against this politics switch over is also the kind of thing that always gives me a lot of optimism, which I think is something that's needed. And that's been one of the best parts of going on this book tour, has been being able to talk to people all across Texas and all across the country. I'm really looking forward to being at the Garden District Bookshop on Friday, April 17th, and continuing these kind of conversations with people, because I think this is a moment where we need a lot of optimism. There's so much devastation and worry and kind of gloom, and rightfully so. We're living in dark times. But I think one thing that I take a lot from this history too is like these folks really had this belief that a better world was possible, that something was coming around the corner that was much better than the present.
Mm-hmm. April 17th, Garden District Books. David Griscom will be actually, giving a talk about his book. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to have Nathan Robinson from Current Affairs joining me there. The conversations have been really great, and especially like the Q&As, hearing from people all across Texas. And we also did an event that was very well attended in New York. I will remind people that if you do show up early, because the books have been selling out, which has been an amazing thing. And I think one of the things that has been really exciting about this tour and this whole experience is just seeing that, like, I'm not alone, right? Obviously, you write a book like this and you say, oh, there's a radical tradition and there's a different alternative possible in Texas. And then it'll be a little embarrassing if no one shows up to these events. But people have been showing up in ways that have frankly even surprised me. And it just shows that there is a hunger for a different way of doing politics and a way of kind of relating to our history. And I'm really looking forward to being able to speak in New Orleans, because I did kind of fudge it a little bit, or cheat. I don't even know if I would call it cheating, but there's a lot about Louisiana. And there's a reason for it, is because Texas and Louisiana are very much interconnected, specifically around one of my favorite parts of the book, the Brotherhood of the Timber Workers, which was one of the first interracial unions in the country, that had a completely different and radical organizing model that brought together blacks and whites in the South, bucking law, bucking convention, and really pointed, I think, to a different future for the South that unfortunately was kind of prevented from coming into being by the bosses.
Yeah. And really, that has been sort of the primary dividing line, not just in the South, but especially in the South, has been the sort of, I guess even through or since the Civil War, since the ending of slavery, just this division of black workers versus white workers, and what the reason for that has always been, because they know if we're if the working class is not fighting one another, they're going to start looking and seeing who's just stuffing their pockets with dollar bills and has got piles of money on their desk or in a vault or something, and they're going to be like, hold on a second. We could just sort of identify who the real enemy is.
And I mean, it's really shocking. It is something I think a lot of people who are engaged in labor organizing or spend time in kind of left political spaces, like, they hear this. It is kind of shocking, though, to go back in go and do like the research and go see the primary sources of these bosses saying, hey, I'm going to pit I'm going to pit the black workers and the white workers against each other because it looks like they're up to something. I mean, it really is like endlessly shocking to see the way that they did it. And they certainly did that with the Brotherhood of Timber Workers to try to break the unity of that union. And the workforce was also highly segregated by design for this exact
Mhm.
reason, because if you could have one part of the workforce being white, or one part of the workforce being black in a workplace that was already just kind of separated just because of the nature of logging in the timber industry, they thought that this would be something that was really successful, which is why I think the fact that this movement was so big and so effective is such an inspiration, because they really had to overcome a lot, like the mentality, the kind of Jim Crow law, and also just all of these kind of attempts by the
Mhm.
bosses to prevent this from happening. But
Mhm.
and it didn't even stop there. I will just note, like, a fascinating thing about the Brotherhood of Timber Workers is they also extended membership to women. So not just women who worked on who like who worked in the industry. They extended it to the wives and the girlfriends of the workers. And the reason for it was, as Big Bill Haywood argued, is like, hey, if y'all go on strike, your wives and your family, they won't be able to afford food. They have just as much stake in this as anyone else. And it
Yep.
ended up being a very effective strategy, not only because of the moral reasons, the political reasons, the reasons that we all like, but it also was just very good at keeping people in line. Because if a man who's a Brotherhood of Timber Workers started to waver and say, hey, I'm going to break, I'm going to scab, I'm going to run away, their wives would say, well, I'll leave you and I'll find a real man. I'll find a union man. And I mean, this was a very effective thing, because it gave the women in the community something to kind of participate in and be a part of this movement that ended up kind of bringing all of this work in solidarity and this really incredible thing that they were building into the home as well as at the
Mhm.
workplace.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Louisiana again, because there is also, again, that radical history that exists. I mean, Huey Long is from Louisiana, and that was one of the major sort of threats, so much to the point where he was on, FDR's list of most dangerous men in America. The famous Pope. I've said this on this show enough times, but the famous po' boy was originally a food that was actually strike food in
Mm-hmm.
the city when the streetcars went on strike. And it's just like one of those things where this history exists everywhere. This
Yeah,
history exists in every part of the country. It just needs to be tapped into.
100%. And one of my favorite people from the book, that I think I might do a whole other book just on him, is
Mm-hmm.
Covington Hall, who was from Mississippi originally, but he was a man from New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
and he founded a bunch of radical newspapers. He was a poet, a good looking man, a dandy. But also a very committed radical and labor organizer, and specifically on the question of fighting for interracial organizing in the South. And he's somebody who has a history that I think is extremely rich, and he should be kind of remembered in the way that I think more and more people are learning about folks like Eugene Debs. I think that especially for Southerners, I think learning more about Covington Hall is something that would be very, very worth your time.
Yeah. I want to like zero in also and sort of connecting some of these past historical movements, which a lot of this organizing took place in extremely calamitous times.
Yeah.
And we currently find ourselves in a quite a calamitous time as well. Like we currently have, absolutely skyrocketing inequality in this country. We have a ruling class that is essentially, if they're, I mean, look, people like to say that Donald Trump is insane for picking a war with Iran. I also remember a year ago or less than that when Chuck Schumer was like cutting videos saying that no side deals with Iran, taco Trump, like you don't wuss out on this. So like we have a ruling class that's united in the United States imperial war machine that currently exists, and it's quite urgent, I guess you would say, to learn these lessons of the past, uh, to to figure out, or at least to sort of like draw parallels to how building power could be done in the present day.
I totally agree, and I mean, I'd also note that Kamala Harris, who I'm glad has kind of spoken out against Trump's agitation and threats of war crimes in Iran. But don't forget that during the 2024 election, one of the arguments she was making against Trump was that he was going to remove the economic sanctions on Iran.
Yeah.
um no, so there's different degrees when it comes to this political class, but they are kind of united on on this militarism. And this is, I think, a thing that ended up being really kind of fascinating about a lot of these kind of political movements and why building these organizations is so important. um, for the Texas Socialist Party, two major international events really kind of set them up, set their history in front of them. One was the Mexican Revolution, which was massively influential on the Texas Socialists because, one, it forced them to challenge a lot of the kind of racial bigotry that kind of existed within the movement, but it also encouraged them to start standing in solidarity on an international level. And the Rebel, which is a Texas Socialist paper, would regularly reprint radical papers from Mexico, and vice versa. And this kind of like cross-border solidarity was one of the best parts of that kind of radical tradition. Another one was opposition to World War One, and this was something that ended up being, unfortunately, the death knell for the socialists. The Texas Socialists paper, the Rebel, was the first paper that was shut down under the Espionage Act.
Mhm.
And you can see how how critical this kind of movement of working class people was in standing up against World War One, how much of a threat it was to those at the top. And for some of the labor movement and for some of the kind of renters unions that the socialists organized, those were able to exist for a few more years during this period of time. But it does just again show how important it is to build that kind of across the board working class organizations to be able to make these correct critiques of empire, because you will have to withstand a lot of abuse from the state if you stand up strongly against these things.
Absolutely. And that state repression, I guess, that does come down, like you mentioned, the Espionage Act. It's not as direct, I guess you would say, in the modern day, but that they're going to, like, even when you look at platforms or things like that, and I all the people at home, take a drink because we're mentioning him again. But when you see like Twitch, you know, suspend Hassan Piker or whatever, or ban him from that. That is modern day censorship that is currently taking place to stifle political speech. So this kind of these kinds of, like, they're a little bit more hidden, and they're kind of sort of dressed up in the modern parlance of terms of service or whatever it is for these platforms, but they're performing the exact same function. Like those times back then and these times right now are not that different.
100%. And again, the fact that they shut down the newspaper in Texas was like was a major thing because that newspaper allowed the movement to be really spread out. Like, I don't want to be cliche here, forgive me, but Texas is a big place. So having a newspaper that you could get from West Texas to East Texas was really important for them to stay in contact right now. And this is a big part with kind of like left-wing media as well today, is that, it allows a kind of low barrier of entry and an ability to reach a lot of people where they're at. But you also see the kind of danger of it too, because of the capacity of these platforms to be able to restrict it. And much like the old well, that then it was like the mail system, which was the distributor, which obviously the U.S. government had a role controlled, and that's how they were able to shut these papers down. Obviously, Twitch and YouTube and these other platforms aren't particularly interested in hearing too much of these things, and even beyond outright bans. The way that I've been doing YouTube stuff for a very long time.
Oh, they're tyrannical. YouTube is tyrannical.
100%. And not only in terms of like banning things, pulling things, but also they determine these platforms are, in a way, like, you don't actually choose as much. Like, you may subscribe to some channels and things like that, but most people, when they go on YouTube, they type in youtube.com and they see what's in front of them. YouTube decides what that is. which means that this platform gets to make decisions about the information that you're able to consume. You might be able to feed it some of your preferences, but it makes those kind of decisions. And they'll say, hey, we don't want people to talk about Palestine. We don't want people to talk about this kind of issue. And those things will never even see the light of day. It's not just like, oh, people don't like them and they're unpopular. They're not even being delivered to people for them to make the decision whether or not they like them in the first place. Which is, this is the kind of tension I think with digital and alternative media right now, is that there's a lot of opportunity to reach people, but there's also a lot of areas where the kind of the rich and the powerful have influence over.
Yeah, and there's WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3 is Good Morning Comrade. Our guest today is David Griscom. He is the author of The Myth of Red Texas, Cowboys, Populism, and Class War in the Radical South. On April 17th, you can actually see him at Garden District Books, talking about this book, answering questions, and signing, I imagine. So get your tickets now. You can look in the you can look in the description of the podcast version of the show and get that information. But I really did want to talk about. So it's like two pieces as well. So we have this sort of like, we're not talking about the current and the present, which is fine. I'm happy to do this. We're looking at a consolidation of like media in this country into the hands of some extremely wealthy people, Elon Musk, Ellison's, all these other things, and they're essentially performing the functions of a government censorship. It's just sort of been kind of outsourced. Because they're essentially able to, these people are able to influence the government with the massive amounts of money they inject into the the government itself, or into the elections that we have. And then at the same time, they're able to sort of like control these media platforms, which people sort of get any kind of communication out, even like this. And I don't know, it really is sort of this consolidation of power into the hands of so few that I mean, again, we need to. There's a sense of urgency in finding these ways to organize against this.
I totally agree. I mean, I would also add that when we think about censorship, when we think about these kind of questions, a lot of times we think about what's not being heard. But I think a lot of times we should also think about what it is that you're hearing and the way that you're hearing it, because
what's privilege in these networks, or what's privilege in these algorithms.
Yeah, and I don't just mean it in the sense of like, I mean, obviously, if you spend any time on Twitter now, obviously you're going to see a lot more kind of right-wing accounts, and those people have a large platform, but also just the way of doing media. You are encouraged to cover things in a certain way. I know this is somebody who tries very hard to avoid it on my programs, Left Reckoning and the Jacobin Show. But I know, for example, if I put two things against each other, say like so and so versus this, that's going to do very well, because the YouTube algorithm very much encourages that. Well, it's not a surprise that like some of the bigger channels on left-wing YouTube are channels that spend most of their time being like, oh my Lord, this streamer said this and this streamer said that, and
drama.
Yeah. And look, I think sometimes there's a point in critiquing other people in our industry. I'm not going to sit here and act like holier than thou. I'm just recognizing that like there are things that are kind of being encouraged, and this affects our kind of political discourse. You see this within our political movement as well. On questions with like major elected officials and their relationships to organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America. There is a version of things that you see if you spend most of your time, you get most of your information from social media. That's probably not as reflective of like the more on the ground conversations and the relational conversations between organizations like the DSA and elected officials. And you should wonder, hey, am I kind of getting stuck into a rage trap because it's beneficial to Elon Musk? Because I think a lot of people get stuck in that and think that like, oh, what I'm doing right now is actually participating in radical and revolutionary politics.
Yeah, well, and man, I can't tell you. Like, I saw this thing, and now I'm just, maybe this is just me complaining about something I saw on the internet, but like I saw there was a post from, I think it was some kind of Palestinian associated group or something like that, and they said that like Zoran Mamdani, the mayor of New York City, had betrayed Palestine because he said something about somebody that his wife had retweeted one time. And he like denounced her because of some things that people said were, I don't know. It was wild that this sort of like talking about some not anything policy related, not
Mhm.
anything related to how he's governing as mayor of New York City, but the fact that he said something about somebody, who, who's, I guess, controversial or something like that. And I find this to be, you're constantly seeing this with AOC. Very recently, she said that she was against arms, like selling arms to Israel, which is like, that's awesome. And people have
Mhm.
been telling her to make these kinds of statements for a long time, and she never, I guess, said, even though her record fairly good on this, she's never, I guess, come out and said, I'm against all weapons to Israel or whatever. Well, she recently did do that, and now I guess there's even folks that are still saying that's not good enough. That's just like, okay, I don't know what to do here.
Well, and on that issue specifically, it's like I think it's very fair to kind of criticize the congresswoman for some of the statements that she's made and positions that she's taken over
Of
time.
course,
What's
of course.
and I know you're not saying this, but like I wanted to say that just because when I think the fundamental issue is that there is also this kind of like unreality politics where I
Yeah.
think there is a non-insignificant portion of people on the left who think that she has been like one of Israel's major funders and boosters because again, if you do spend time on these platforms, there is so much calling misinformation disinformation. I don't know, there's a kind of lot of like willful and vague statements on this thing, and I think that some people know what they're doing, and I think a lot of people don't have the time to kind of like comb through congressional votes, and they are just like working long days and living their life and care about these issues, and then they see somebody say like, whoa, AOC's like betrayed the movement because she supports Israel, and they're rightfully upset. And I think that like the bigger question and the kind of thing that we have to kind of remind people of in our movement is that there are things that are beneficial to Elon Musk and kind of our enemies, and a big part of that is getting people into a state of kind of rage and confusion. You can look at her record and be engaged in these things and have a different opinion than like the DSA or that I do or something like that, and we'll have a conversation, a debate even about these kind of things. But what
Mhm.
frustrates me to no end is how a lot of these things end up kind of being based on misinformation that is purposefully put out there because it's very beneficial for a few small people who make money off of keeping people addicted to podcasts and to be on social media. And I think that it is a kind of it's a difficult, I think, part of our movement right now to kind of go through this because while we all, a lot of people in my generation are quick to kind of make fun of our parents' generation for not being particularly media literate. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's a generational question or problem anymore.
No. It's almost, yeah, no, I 100% agree on that piece. And what it serves the function of is essentially like, I 100% agree with you on the piece where, you can be critical of, the congresswoman or even the mayor for how he has responded to I would say pretty bad faith even attacks, not by necessarily by leftists,
Yeah.
even though I say that there are some of them, but by like the Israel lobby and APAC and all these other groups who are just coming at him for every single time he breathes, he's called an anti-Semite or something like that. And but if you have this sort of, like, you can be critical of how they respond to that, but if you're just going to go out and say that they're pro-Israel and pro-genocide or whatever the hell, and call him Zioron like he's a Zionist or something, like, just like, you're being silly. But I guess with the function of that, or what the outcome of it is to have that solidaristic breakdown that we talked about
Mhm.
earlier, and that solidarity, that sort of like at least understanding that you're at least rowing the same boat in the same direction, is a prerequisite to any kind of power or movement building.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, I would just say that like there's no scalp that APAC and those kind of groups would like more than Zorons or
Yeah, yeah.
AOCs.
Don't
So
do
like,
their work for them.
don't kid yourself. And then again, I mean, I think if there are going to be tests, litmus tests, whatever word you want to use for them, they have to be passable. And
Yes.
and the thing that I think is really important to remember about AOC and the DSA endorsement is that she gets asked by the movement. And like for me, what happened with her recently was a major success for DSA because there is a
100%.
there is a crisis, an issue in DSA where officials get elected, they have a lot of power. How do they stay kind of connected and within the movements that got them into power. It's especially hard for somebody like AOC, who kind of, I wouldn't say got lucky, because that would, discount all the hard work that got her, that went into getting her to office, but was unexpected. Let's say, was felt early for the movement. So this is a moment where people are like, okay, there seems to be a little bit of a lack of connection between her statement sometimes and the outlook of the movement. The movement comes to her and they say, here are the things that we would like you to say. And she says, I commit to those things fully.
Mhm.
Well, if she says that and then you say, well, that's not good enough, then you're setting yourself up for a situation where with other politicians, including ones who are maybe closer, to the certain segments of the movement than even AOC is,
Mhm.
why would you want to,
Yeah.
agree to these kind of things? Because,
The most natural response is "F you" after
yeah,
that, you know?
yeah, no, and it's an important thing to kind of set up a relationship where there's thing, and like, just be clear, for people who haven't been following, the results of the endorsement aren't out, and I would expect, I think there's another week or so in the voting for New York City, and I would expect that she wins the endorsement. But I'm just noting that, like, there are factions and segments that are saying, oh, well, she agreed to all of our demands, but uh, that's not enough for us, and I think that that's probably a political problem.
It's a huge political problem. It's a huge problem in terms of like organizational coherency for a group like DSA, because if you're going to have like, I am like, again, like I do love that there is a democratic process that's being taken place in order to endorse a candidate, I guess, for elected office. But like when it comes down to it, like, and maybe this is me reading it in bad faith, but there are people that are, I guess, not in favor of doing electoral politics in any way, that are making their sort of opinions known about these, like in these sort of realms.
Hmm.
And they're spending a lot of time on that instead of doing the things that they actually do believe in, things like, mutual aid or anti-war protests or whatever it is, which I am fully supportive. And I'm not going to be as critical of those folks, in their efforts as they are doing in this one. I don't know. It's like it's a very strange kind of like
Well,
situation
no, I mean, totally, and I think, we've had, I mean, really, DSA has this massive influx of membership in, 2017, 2018. So let's say 8 years, 9 years, really, of this kind of project, and this has been a live debate for a very long time.
here.
And I don't think it will go away. And I think that it's important to make sure that these movements are disciplined, and they're also not kind of falling into, um, let's say reformism, to use terminology some folks would use, or maybe to be more clear about it, just kind of falling in line and being comfortable with the victories and not wanting to rock the boat. I mean, if you're a radical, if you're a socialist, you should be outraged at the system and want, significant changes, and quickly at that. Um, but at the same time, there has been a segment of the movement that has been working and has like achieved a lot of kind of victories. Zoran being one of them, AOC an early one, but many, many others, Rashida, Cori Bush, we can go through the list. And there's been a segment that has been very much against those projects from the get-go. And there is a moment where my co-host Matt Lex calls it the not like that left. And he says, fair
Yeah.
enough, but let's see what the strategy or the move is here, because there have been a lot of time now that we can ask, what has that approach like been able to achieve? And I think that that's a fair question that we should be able to, be serious adults. And like, you look at the history of the socialist movement, that's in my book, or the populist movement, and these were movements that had to develop the capacities to do these things very quickly. We're up against these same kind of questions,
Mhm.
and the answer is not to moderate necessarily or to be conservative, but to be very much laser focused on what are the demands, where are the ways that we can influence society, the state, and the workforce, and get wins for working class people, because those things can compound very, very quickly. And at a certain point, if we're not even getting to step one, step two of this long process, which is like 100-step process of like really building sustained change for working class people, we probably have a strategic problem that goes beyond people not being too, adherent enough to certain kind of uh, ways of presenting themselves and talking.
Yeah. You listen to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. Good morning, comrade. David Griscom is our guest. He is the author of The Myth of Red Texas. And on April 17th, you can see him at Garden District Books talking about his book as well. Um, I really do want to drill down on that efficacy piece and that sort of like laser focus piece because like that is sort of like the nut of it, isn't it? There is, and I hate to, I guess, sort of boil it down and make it seem like the not like that left, I guess, is a really interesting and I think a pretty good way of putting it. Um, there there is a way to like we're seeing success in Zoran Mamdani and AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Summerlee and all these. Ilhan Omar, I don't want to leave her out. I love her. As
Hmm.
far as like elected officials go. And there are ongoing projects to essentially build something of a political like base of power, like that is a part of a larger coherent strategy. And I know that there's a disagreement about endorsing like DSA endorsing somebody in Los Angeles who's I think a lot more controversial than the Doron would have been, but who was a longtime member of DSA. This other person in LA has been sort of like, I guess, more standoffish and has been sort of anti some of our positions. But like there's at least I'm a member of DSA. I've been a member for 9 years now or something like that. But like it is one of those sorts of things where you can sort of you you can see a strategy of a trajectory of that organization and seeing it being constructed and seeing a coherent strategy of essentially building power within these formal structures, and that sort of being it's almost like a battle for the direction of that organization, and it's really kind of difficult to see it. It's difficult to watch.
I mean, 100%. And yeah, I think there's importance of having people be in the movement. I think that's a real advantage for somebody like Zoran, because a lot of people are interested in getting DSA endorsements because it's a movement that has a lot of not just positive recognition and people have good ideas about it and are excited about it. When they hear somebody's DSA endorsed, they know that means they're very progressive. But it also has ground game, which is a massive thing, which most campaigns really, really want. So I think it is important to kind of like, protect, just like, oh, we might have associations or interest in other folks, but saying like, oh, we're only really going to endorse members of our movement is critical. And this is something that, both the populists and the socialists in Texas kind of had to work through as well. I mean, the history there, I think to DSA right now, is very, very, it's very similar. These were movements that I think are way more advanced than DSA is right now, and there's kind of trajectory to see where the DSA will go. But they had to ask themselves, okay, who should be the leadership of the organization? Do they need to be, a member of the working class? Do they need to be a member of this party, this organization? In fact, the Texas Socialist Party, the way that they ended up really growing was that two of their members initially, after the failure of populism, the defeats of populism, decided that they were going to try to create an insurrection, secede from the Union again, and create a socialist republic of Texas. Now, Eugene Debs talked him down from that, and good thing he did, because what ended up happening instead was a socialist movement that ended up, while not winning power in the same way that the populists did, they affected a lot of change because the Democratic Party in Texas had to respond to them. So you saw that with Democratic governors seeing there's this revolt amongst the poor in Texas. It meant that they had to start implementing some of these early programs that would kind of be fully fleshed out under FDR and the New Deal, right? We were better off when there was a kind of a strong working class movement, even when it was agitating outside of power. And the only reason that it had some threats was because they were talking about real things that affected people every day on a basic level that they could understand, articulate. And that, I think, is the real crisis, and question for the left is, what is it that working class people want? What are their needs? Where are they getting, messed over in the society right now? And what are our solutions? And what is our capacity to help them? Like, if you say to people like, oh, well, one day we'll have this beautiful morning, comrade, and like everything will be better tomorrow, because we'll have a revolution. Well, tomorrow will come one day, and when you're not able to do that, they'll just know you as the kind of, loony guy who's saying really nice things but never comes to fruition. If you're somebody who says, hey, you know what, we need to get water breaks for working class people because it's hot in the South and we're getting taken advantage by our bosses, and you can win that, then you can build off of that, and start addressing more and more needs as you bring people to the movement, because they say, hey, that's a political movement that spending my time in, being involved in, gets the goods.
It's concrete. It's
Yeah.
concrete. It is right there. It is it is very specific concrete demand, which is why again, I get a little bit frustrated when you see the sort of modern, political, I guess the sort of like progressive left or whatever. They've kind of moved away from things like Medicare for all. They've kind of like, you don't really hear that as much. And it's if you ask somebody, about it, they'll say they're supportive of it, but you're not seeing, outside of, I guess, Abdul Sayed in Michigan, somebody as a Medicare for all candidate. And uh, part of what I think was so, I guess, attractive about Bernie, besides the fact that he definitely does speak like a movement leader, and he has done for longer than I've been alive, and you too, I'm sure. The you got to give him some meat. You got to give him something that would be something that they could sink their teeth into.
Yeah, and and for people who might say, "Oh, this is a soft demand, a sock dem, social democrat demand." First of all, yeah, I'm not too worried about that. I would love some social democracy myself. But also, Medicare for all, they didn't call it that, but this was also a demand of like the Socialist Party under Deb. So like, if they weren't good enough for you, and this isn't good enough for you, I mean, maybe we'll be waiting around forever for something to be good enough for you. It's interesting. They just did a big poll here in Texas of Texas Democrats, and popularity poll, and what ended up the number one politician in terms of favorability was James Tallarico. Not too surprising, because he won. Number two, Bernard Sanders, still holding that spot. And I think that there were some machinations that happened in the Democratic primary in Texas back in 2020 that were unfortunate for Bernie, but there really was a kind of path not taken, I think, around Bernie, because he still does have significant popularity, particularly in parts of South Texas and around the Hispanic vote in this state that have in recent years even moved away from the Democratic Party entirely. So it was very interesting to see. And Tallarico's win, he did best in those same counties that Bernie won back in 2020. So there's still a lot of that kind of fire, even from our recent kind of political history, still alive here in Texas.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Tallarico, because I remember, the election, kind of running up to it. It was like one of these sorts of things where Tallarico was running literally on these policies, on this stuff you can sink your teeth into. I guess it's just sort of how I've categorized it in my mind. And the entire sort of opposition campaign by Jasmine Crockett was, oh, we'll have ChatGPT make up issues page, 5 weeks after we were expected to have done it, and have errors involved in the thing as well. And then basically do everything that you can to try to sort of torpedo this guy personally, who's just like a choir Boy Scout, like.
But my friend, I do have to say though, and this is somebody who wrote a lot of positive kind of articles about Tallarico. Crockett supports Medicare for all, and Tallarico doesn't. Which is pretty.
Yikes.
Now she doesn't run on it. She didn't run on it, which was.
Is it like the Buttigieg, like Medicare for all that want it kind of thing, or?
Tallarico's is even more grating to the ears. It is Medicare for y'all.
Oh my God, I hate it.
And he has said he supports Medicare for all as a goal, and this is the pathway to get there. I find that to be very lame,
very weak. Yeah,
a total disappointment. And if he has aspirations to actually win the Senate race, I think he needs to really reform that position. But the thing is that Tallarico, I think, did have a kind of a message that, one, I think, was talking about the billionaire class, which I think really resonated with people. He was talking about money for politics. And I also think that he did a really good job of being able to appeal to people who might be Republicans. The way he talked about Republicans was about Republican politicians, which kind of invited people who might identify as a Republican to go out and support him and vote for him, which will be necessary if he, again, intends to win the Senate seat here in Texas.
Right. Yeah. And that's another, I guess, another piece of it as well. And I think it's part of why people are rightly skeptical of the sort of like, the Zoran and AOC sort of thing. And it's a critique that I actually can get behind, even though I do think their characterization of like New York City as not having a working class is ridiculous. But like there is a difference between New York and Texas, and there does need to be some sort of like a differences in style and differences in approach that go on about these things. And it would be great to have case studies of folks that are not from places like that. I mean, they do exist. Michigan's a great example
I have one
of
for
folks
you.
go ahead.
I have a great one for you. Taylor Ramett. I don't know if you followed
Mhm.
this at all, but Tarrant County, Texas, one of the
Mhm.
largest Republican counties,
Oh yeah,
counties
I
in the
remember this.
country.
Yeah.
Taylor Ramett flipped the Trump district overwhelmingly by focusing on this very much bread and butter kind of politics issue. I mean, really, I think proved the
Mhm.
thesis that you can flip these Trump seats, running pro-union working class Democrats who speak everyday language and say to the culture war, hey, that doesn't really seem like the kind of thing that's affecting the price of groceries. I'm going to
Right.
move on from it.
Or even that he didn't win, but that Osborne fella in Nebraska as well, right?
Yeah, and he's running again, and he's polling very well.
Mhm.
Additionally, so I think there's definitely a lane for that I think we're seeing, and yeah, it's different from Zoran. I mean, I think you could run a good Zoran campaign. I mean, I totally agree. As a Texan, I'm contractually obliged to say that there's a huge difference between Texas and New York.
It's
But
like
you know what?
your birthright to make that distinction.
But I will say, the but I don't think that it's a New York value to say that the rent's too expensive. I don't think that it's a
No.
New York value to say that buses should be free. I don't think it's a New York value to say that we should, take care of our children and give them childcare. All those kind of things, I think that you could run. So yeah, maybe you don't run Zoran himself, but also Zoran polls very well in
Yeah, no,
Texas.
he's super popular. What I mean to say is like there are some stylistic differences that
No,
need to
100%. I agree. Yeah, yeah.
we do need to wrap it up, but David Griscom, you are the author of The Myth of Red Texas. You are also one of the hosts of the Jacobin Show. You are the host of Left Reckoning and so much more. Tell folks where they can find all of your. How do you have like any free time? Like, where can people find your projects and all the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, you can find me at social media. It's at David Griscom everywhere, Instagram, Twitter, etc. You can read more. You can pick up the book Myth of Red Texas at OR Books, and you can come see me at the Garden District Bookshop April 17th, 6 to 8. It's free and open to the public, but get there early if you want a book. I'll be there with Nathan Robinson of Current Affairs. Really excited to be back in New Orleans. And, you can keep up with me at Left Reckoning, Jacobin, davidgriscom.info if you want to keep up with the tour. And if Nicholas is listening to this, shout out, my brother. Hope to see you soon.
All right. Well, thank you so much. As always, David, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Good Morning Comrade. You can listen to us every Saturday at 10 a.m. on WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. You can also check out any of our platforms, Twitch, YouTube. You can also find us on this space on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for listening. We love you. Bye-bye.